Howdy, welcome to Black Army Radio episode number 2. Tiebreaker coming at you with Joe Manzanares, and we're just gonna go right into the deep waters today, boys and girls. And so, real quick though, before we even do that, we did get some comments and suggestions on whatnot from the first episode. I'm gonna try not to cuss as much. I don't know. I can't. I'm not gonna make any guarantees on that, but I'm gonna give her hell on that sucker regarding walking on each other and whatnot. A lot of that is internet connection. We're not in the same place. I'm in one part of Colorado. Joel's in another part of Colorado. There's some editing and stuff that I can do with that, and we're gonna do our best with that. And we're gonna give a little background on ourselves, even though there is a bio, just real quick on this deal. So Ty Bricker, I grew up in Durango, Colorado, the son of an outfitter and a nurse, just backcountry my whole life. Joined the Army after 9/11, felt compelled, ended up in Ranger Battalion for a number of years, jumped out of Ranger Bat in like '07, ended up contracting for the agency for a number of years after that until about 2013. And then took a job as a federal law enforcement officer and basically did that for another decade until I pretty much retired with basically 20 years of government service. And then, and now I'm just working on my PhD in history. And so, loving life, doing that kind of like Mr. Mom in a way, and focusing on school, and felt compelled to do this, kind of like we talked about in the first episode, because I want to see my boys. I got a bunch of boys, got a bunch of kids running plate carriers and guns on the streets of America against other people's kids. And so, history teaches us that it's inevitable, but maybe not for our generation, maybe not for the next generation. And so, I don't want, like I said, I got a bunch of kids, and my family is my number one priority above all things. And so, because of that, a healthy republic is going to give us a healthy family. And so, have a healthy family unit in economics and all the other stuff. And so, yeah, that's why I'm doing it. Joel, go.
Yeah, my name's Joel Manzanares. Grew up in Colorado, kind of in a left-leaning household, liberal household. My dad was a railroad engineer. My mom worked part-time as a housekeeper and managing housekeepers. Grew up being in a hunter outside. Grew up with guns in the house. I'm a big proponent of the Second Amendment, things like that. I have some views that are probably more liberal for some, but have a background in the gun industry. I started a company with my business partner, Aaron, who introduced me to Ty. They were both Army Rangers. They had similar backgrounds, so they clicked right away. And Aaron, knowing me through the starting of the company and the friendship, he kind of said, "You and Ty have a lot of similarities. And you end up in the same point." And so me and Ty kind of formed a friendship and started talking, and kind of both ended up in the same place when it came to politics, and maybe got there different ways, but ended up in the same place. And for me, the biggest thing is since COVID and just the political climate, the fabric of this country has kind of been slowly eroding under our feet. There's a lot of turmoil between sides, and I have a lot of friends who are polar opposite when it comes to how they view the world. And I think a lot of them want the same thing as Americans and as citizens of this country. And hopefully conversations like this could help bring insight or be an olive branch for the other side to realize that, hey, we're all here on the same team. And regardless if we have different ideologies, we got to live next to each other and be neighbors. And I think conversations like this could help make that happen. So more or less why I'm here.
Excellent. So I said we're going to jump into the deep waters right away on this sucker. I don't know if I actually said why, but we're going to talk about Israel. Israel, yay! We're going to talk about Israel, and we're going to try not to be labeled as anti-Semites, though it's going to be very difficult not to do that. We're going to, like this conversation, we're going to be focusing on a few different things here, okay? We're not just here to smash Israel or smash our relationship and all this other stuff. We're actually going to look at the totality of circumstances around this investigation that especially these new generations coming up are starting to have with amongst themselves and with each other. and with debates in the older generation that has, in a lot of ways, fundamentally different values and ideas regarding the Israeli state and how they believe we should be supporting it via our blood and treasure. The new generation, the younger generation that's having very, very difficult times economically right now is not valuing the relationship with Israel. I should say is like what our current elected kings and queens really do. And so I think it's important for us with as much money as we spend and treasure as we spend, and there is massive debates taking place, make no mistake. And then the wars. Right now, for example, we have the biggest naval armada sitting outside of Iran since like 2002, 2003, and the kickoff of Iraq 2, pretty much with GWAT. And Netanyahu's been to Congress a whole bunch of times this year, and we've provided an extensive amount of money and weapon systems to that area. And now it's not just that, we're giving them our sons and daughters. And make no mistake, it is our sons and daughters. I mean, I'm 45 years old. It's not me going over there. It's our people's, it's our buddies' kids now. It's the guys that had served in the previous war. It's their kids' generation. It's going over there right now. Now, whether or not anything is going to come of it, we don't know. Like the shooting hasn't started, but there is a hell of a lot of rhetoric out there, and it's going on. And we did hit them with the 12-day was Operation Midnight Hammer, I think it was called, when they hit the nuclear strikes for the nuclear facilities. And now it's for ballistic missiles. And I don't know about you, but I don't know any country in the history of the world that is going to just disarm itself entirely, which is kind of what we're asking for, which is really what Israel's asking. And so I fought in the Iraq War, did a whole bunch of deployments, and a little bit of history here with that. In 2002, for those of you that may not know, Benjamin Netanyahu came to Congress and testified in front of our Congress about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And basically said, hey, we need to get over there and we need to kick Saddam Hussein out and instill a different form of government and keep them from getting weapons of mass destruction. So not only Israel doesn't get blown up, the United States gets blown up, because everything, even like this Iran talk, is always about American security somehow, right? I mean, Iran can't touch us with anything. You know what I mean? Outside of some kind of guerrilla warfare, tactical terrorist thing that they might install, but like a direct old school style World War II, Vietnam era attack is not on the horizon with Iran, right? Israel's a different story. Israel's in the neighborhood. Okay, so Israel is, for them, this is very, very important, is they see it. Okay. And we're kind of like the big brother. You know what I'm saying? Like we give firepower, money, like we give them lunch money and we protect them at recess. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of like we're willing to spill our own blood and our own treasure for their defense. And in a lot of ways, I think there's a lot more information and knowledge now than there used to be. And so people are asking a lot more questions, and rather than being labeled an anti-Semite for answering these questions, they're just getting more angry and they're starting to demand answers. Like labeling somebody an anti-Semite today doesn't mean what it meant 20 years ago. Doesn't mean what it meant 10 years ago. Like people don't care anymore. It's like, listen, I'm not talking about a religion. Here's another thing. Israel's not a religion. It's a state. It's a state. That's what it is. It's a state. It has free healthcare, free education. It has an economy. It has a military. It is a state. It is not a religion. It is not a church. Okay. It is not a mosque. It is not a synagogue. It is a state. It's a state that is subsidized in a lot of ways by us, by the American labor dollars. And that is another thing people are getting a little bit upset about, because our economy is so dog shit right now. And people are like, hey, we've invested 20 billion here, 20 billion there, 20 billion here, 20 more billion there in these wars for the last 3 or 4 years. And people here you got kids that are 23 years old that are living in their cars paying $1,200 a month in student loan debt that is not going to be forgiven for any reason, or they can't even declare bankruptcy on. They're living in a car. Like they're not even going to be in a house maybe their entire lives without living with other roommates and stuff. People economically here are suffering. So people are asking questions. Go ahead, Joel.
And I think another thing what's changed a lot on this is the optics of the awakening of a younger generation and the access to see what's actually happening on the Gaza Strip, and the access to the 24/7 news stream, like you see some stuff more real time, and it's still hard to find it, as far as how it's dealt with in our media, but the optics of the war. And I think some of the optics, what isn't fair to some of the Palestinians and not standing up for Hamas or any of these terror organizations linked to the Palestinians, but they're forced to do that type of warfare because they are sanctioned. They don't have armies and missiles to bomb like Israel's doing to them. So how do they do it? Is they do it with a suicide vest, or they do it with not saying that's right by any means, but I think for a long time the optics were these crazy terrorist groups are strapping bombs to the chest in the name of Allah, you know, and I think as a society we're kind of growing out of some of that general disdain for that group of Muslim people and seeing there's two sides of this, you know, and especially up until Gaza, I don't think it was bad, but what's gone on there in the last 4 or 5, I mean, it is borderline, I mean, genocide, you know, and how they're handling it. And I think that's a big problem where people are having, we're sending you money and weapons so you could bomb hospital and schools. I'm not down with that. I don't care who it is. I don't care if I disagree with their culture or what they're doing. If we're killing children and women, we're no better than them, you know? And that's how I think those are some of the optics that are changing in this conversation. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point too, because when you bring up Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS and like the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. I'm trying to think of what other. There's so many different sects. Uh, like when we're talking about the Palestinian people, we're not talking like nobody here is defending Hamas, Hezbollah, PLO, like all these different terrorist organizations that are out there strapping bombs to people and doing B-bids and IEDs and sniper kills and like all these other things they've been doing for a long, long, long time is a part of like what they consider the resistance. We're not like we're talking about the Palestinian people here. Okay, this is saying all Palestinians are Hamas or Hezbollah. It'd be like saying that everybody that lives in Chicago is gangsters' disciples. Okay, like that's the kind of logic we're talking about here. South Chicago has the problem. They have a huge murder rate and a massive gang problem there. Okay. Now, the entirety of Chicago is not South Chicago, but we were to carpet bomb if we were to carpet bomb all of Chicago to kill the gangster disciples in South Chicago, you might have a little misplaced management there. You know what I'm saying? Because the gangster's disciples are not Chicagoans. Chicagoans are not the gangster disciples. Same thing with LA with the Bloods and Crips. Los Angelinos are not the Bloods and Crips, okay? The Palestinians are not Hamas and Hezbollah. The Palestinians are a people. They live in a war-torn society, a society they do not have any rights in at all. They have no equal protection of the law. They have very, very little property and business rights, which is more and more getting taken away every day. They are a people, okay? When you're talking about Hamas, it's like talking about the IRA with the Irish, right? Okay, some people are going to support the IRA. A lot of people didn't support the IRA, even Irish people, because they didn't like their tactics. But not all Irish people were the fucking IRA. Not all Palestinian people are Hamas. Not all Chicagoans, believe it or not, are part of the gangster disciples. Okay? Like you have to have some independent thought and analysis here and some cognitive development and separate these things a little bit. Okay? In our society, we're taught to hate a lot. And after 9/11, we were taught to kind of just hate Muslims a lot too. Okay? And I want to move away from that because I spent a lot of time in Islamic countries as well. And come to find out, like the vast majority of those people, like, are just people raising families, doing their thing. They have a different belief structure, religion, and governmental system than we do. But guess what? The United States has only been around a few hundred years. The rest of the world has been around thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, some of these societies, and they're ingrained in their ways in a different way than we are. Okay. And so it is really, really important for us to make that separation to say that and it's the same thing for the Israeli people, for you know, like the Jews, the Israelites, the sons and daughters of Israel, the Hebrews, whatever you want to call them, all those names are biblically correct. They're not all the Messiah. I mean, there's a lot of people that live in Israel, and there's a lot of Jewish people here that live in America that are like not cool with this shit. They're not as cool with it as a lot of this younger generation is, and a lot of these up and comers are that are saying the same kind of things. they're not cool with it either. So you can't just say all Jews or all Israelites or all that stuff either, because it's not, they're not a representation individually of their entire people either. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that's something that gets lost in the conversation because you said anti-Semite to me 10 years ago was somebody who is like, I freaking hate the Jews and they do all these bad things and they control everything. And then now it's turned into like, oh, I don't know if they should be blanket bombing hospitals. I'm kind of speaking out against their government. And then now that's considered anti-Semitic if you're not taking that Zionist approach. And which is funny is that's shifting, but they're pushing harder into that language. Some of the laws that Trump's passed in the last year, referring to talking about Israel and Palestine, there's been people kicked out of colleges, stuff like that, so it's interesting watching as the populace moves away from it, they're pushing harder into it, which probably means they're a little scared, to be honest, but
Dude, that stuff scares the shit out of me, man. It scares the absolute shit out of me, bro, because that is a direct First Amendment violation. Okay, we talked about the Fourth Amendment, some of the other stuff, like the Bill of Rights, dude, is like, I mean, under attack and assault in a way that I did not imagine under this administration. Like, listen, like I said, Israel is a state, man. We're allowed to say anything we want about Thailand, Russia, fucking Mexico, Canada, England. We can talk shit about our allies, any of our other allies, all we want. We can talk shit about the English, the French. Remember how much shit we talked about the French after 9/11 because they wouldn't engage in Iraq war with us? We talked about American fries. It's like we can talk shit about anybody, any society that we want, like legally, basically, unless it's the state of Israel. And now anti-Semitism, that label has transitioned from just saying, I hate Jews or whatever, like how normal like how that label should be administered, to now you can't even talk about the Israeli state in general. You can't question our financial aid to them, our weapon system aid, our backing of their wars. You can't, like, just the state in general has become off limits. That is scary to me because we should be able, if we're funding something as a people, as a society, in a democratic republic that is run by the consent of the governed, we're the governed, our consent, then we should have some say so. It's kind of like this, like war with Iran that might be kicking off. It's like 20% of the American, it's an 80% negative rate right now, polling wise. And it just doesn't fucking matter. Like, it doesn't matter. No new wars, ending wars. Nobody's wanting to go to war with fucking Iran, man. I'm sorry. Unless you're already in the military and your special operations unit and you want to go play a basketball game because you've been training for years and years for this. That's a different story. But like, as a people, we need to be able to pull the reins back. That's our job as fathers and people that are the mature elders of our society. That's what we need to be able to pull the reins back a little bit on this and re-examine it and rethink it a little bit. Do you want to go into anything else before we start talking about kind of like the land heritage aspect of this?
A couple brief thoughts. I mean, I think another frustrating part with Israel is like they have the technology. If they wanted to seek out terrorist cells and hurt, like, and I understand those cells make it hard and interact with normal people, so they can't. It's not as easy, but they did a series of beeper bombings where they set up this super elaborate setting and put these bombs and beeper. Like, they have the tech and the ability to do more incandescent, less blanket bombing stuff, and they're choosing to do it because, I mean, personally, I think Netanyahu is a little out there when it comes to his extreme side of Islam, but yeah, they're choosing to do it, and there's other ways they could be doing it.
Well,
like if they were just hitting
bombing,
these.
Yeah, they're carpet bombing Gaza like it's like Dresden. I mean, if you think about the 12-day, like we're talking about the 12-day Iran war, Operation Midnight Hammer, or whatever it was, there was some real precise shit happening there. I mean, they were sending Hellfires into like foot by foot bathrooms
Right.
of officials. You know what I'm saying? But when it came to Gaza, man, it's like indiscriminate. It is total war. It is total war there. And I mean, it's like, look, listen, we live in America, man. We have American streets. and stuff. Most of the people living in this, like, it's a first world society. Like this, we're not talking about a first world society. I mean, you have to understand that you have to Americanize this issue a little bit. And as Americans, we have a really difficult time understanding what third world poverty and no rights actually looks like, because we don't see that here. We see that shit in the movies. You see it a little bit on the news, but you don't experience it. I mean, it is a level of living that, like, inhumane doesn't even begin to describe it, you know? And it's a shame. And I feel like if we're, especially if you're a Christian and you believe that all human beings are created in the image of God, and for the purpose and for that purpose, then guess what? That includes Palestinians, man. Like, that includes your enemies. Um, the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The New Testament is turn the other cheek. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, what kind of person do you want to be? And I look at this, I look at my own kids. You know what I'm saying? And the way that I see our government going right now, I don't put it past them in 20 years that they're doing the shit that Israel's doing to Gaza right now to our own fucking families, depending on what's going on, you know, depending on what's happening here. And so we need to humanize this a little bit and Americanize it a little bit too, and understand that this isn't an American tale. Like, this isn't an American story. This is a Mesopotamian Middle Eastern story. And those stories are, generally speaking, have been fucked for a really, really, really long time. And for a lot of different reasons that have to do with Western liberal governments going over there and doing a lot of different things. And so, really quick too, before we get into, like, because we're going to talk about land heritage, because we're going to stay away a little bit from the religious aspect of this, because religion and individualism and spirituality is a difficult thing to debate. You know, if you're a Christian Zionist or you're an atheist, like, every Christian Zionist is going to feel differently as a Christian Zionist. Every atheist is going to feel differently as an atheist. And so we're going to stick to the hard, discernible facts that we can debate and we can point to when it comes to what historic land heritage means, because we were talking about historic land heritage. Great interview that just took place, right? Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee. Very telling. If you haven't listened to it, it's about a 3-hour interview. If you're out there, you should 100% listen to this interview. It's two completely different ideals having a very good conversation about what all of this is supposed to mean, what actual land heritage. Are we talking about biblical heritage, or are we talking about land heritage? Because Mike Huckabee wants to combine the two. He's basically saying that the Israeli people have lived there for the last 4,000 years, and not only do they have that history of being there for 4,000 years, but they have the biblical right to be there through the land. Now, biblically, it basically says that they own everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. Biblically, it's a huge piece of land. That includes Syria, Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, parts of Egypt, obviously modern day Israel, and in that whole area, and parts of, like, Lebanon and some other places. And so,
And countries they all went to war with in
correct.
the last 30 years as well.
Yeah, a bunch of countries they went to war with. I mean, even in this war here that we just had, as a response after October 7th. Now, here's another thing. October 7th was a fuck deal. Like, nobody's defending October 7th and that shit. Like, just like we're not here to defend Hamas, we're not here to defend Hezbollah, we're not here to defend PLO, we're not here to defend ISIS or anybody else. It's not fucking what we're doing, obviously. Okay. We're just questioning a blind support of a state that has been taking place for 70 years now, while we are starting as a society to crumble. And so, like, that is what we're starting to talk about. We're not saying that these organizations are righteous in any way. And so, since October 7th, Israel has bombed Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Yemen, Qatar, and Tanzania on top of the Gaza Strip. That's like a lot of places. That's a lot of different wars. Okay, and a lot of different people that they've been bombing since October 7th, hunting down terrorists in all these different places, air fingers quote terrorists, right? And so, also, before we I want to do a couple definitions really quick, because this is important for us to understand, because we're going to throw some of these terms around, because we are talking about like historic state kind of development here. And there's a lot of different kinds of state development. A theocratic state. Okay. A theocratic state is a state based entirely on religion, basically. Okay. Israel, I wouldn't consider Israel to be a theocratic state. You think about like the Black Ages, or in Europe, where it was entirely run by the Catholic Church. That was more of a theocratic state, because the church was able to burn people up, scientists, all kinds of other people that, if you challenge any kind of orthodoxy, that probably falls more along the lines of an old school theocratic state. Then you have a monotheistic state. A monotheistic state is a centralized power, more authoritarian leaning, but it is based on religion, one religion. And so that also kind of falls along the lines of the Middle Ages as well, because you were talking about Catholicism. That's a one religion thing. So if you think about Israel, Israel is a Jewish state. Like, for example, if you're an Israeli citizen, you cannot marry outside of the Israeli faith without permission in the state of Israel. If you wanted to marry a Christian or a Muslim or an atheist, you have to seek permission to be able to do that. It's not just something you can do, even though they're a democracy. Okay. Monotheistic state, centralized power. It could even be elected, falls under one religious category. A secular state. A secular state is a government that is neutral about religion. So think about the United States and the First Amendment. Forget about all this America is a Christian nation stuff. Okay. Officially, America is not a Christian nation based on the First Amendment, the clear and obvious separation of church and state. You can worship the devil in the public square if you so choose, openly, right? As long as you're not threatening somebody else directly or doing an imminent harm to like property or an individual. But you are free to worship as you see fit, legally. Like I said, as long as you don't hurt somebody's property or an individual on an individual level. All right. Those are basically the three states you're going to hear a lot of talk: theocratic state, monotheistic state, and a secular state. You got any questions about that, man?
Nope. I mean, makes pretty sense.
Sweet.
I think I wish more people paid attention to what a secular state actually means in the United States. There's a lot of argument between that topic itself, but back to Israel. Go ahead.
Yeah, there is. And, it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting argument. I mean, I don't really take it that seriously because you just have to do a little bit of personal investigation. I mean, you can say whatever you want, man. You can say, fucking anything and like believe whatever you want. But like there is truths and there's not truths. And the First Amendment makes it pretty damn clear that religious freedom was one of the founders' primary concerns with establishing this state, was religious freedom, because they themselves witnessed and experienced a shit ton of religious persecution. And so for them, like that was their lived experience. They literally lived religious persecution as a Christian, which is like against other Christians, right? The Protestants and the Catholics in a lot of ways. I mean, they killed the fuck out of each other for a hell of a long time, just as bad as the Sunni and the Shia Muslims did and still do. And so anyway, like, that being said, so let's talk a little bit about land heritage, because when Tucker Carlson interviewed Mike Huckabee, he brought up land heritage. Now, if you took out your phone right now and you Googled how long have the Israelites, Hebrews, sons and daughters of Israel, take your pick, inhabited the land of Judea, or, just that area, that region, and you're going to get around 4,000 years. That's what you're going to get as your Googleable history. And that's fine. We could even go with that. However, Mike Huckabee was pressed on a question that was very, very interesting to me, because Tucker Carlson was talking about how England and Ireland is kind of under threat from immigration, because, I mean, the Middle East has just been experiencing decades and decades and decades of war. So everybody's acting so shocked that all these immigrants are migrating to Europe and the Americas. Like,
right.
Why are they coming over here? Well, I don't know, maybe because they don't want to live in a country that literally has no law, no economy, no way to get property, fucking no future for your kids. Like, they're going to move, man. Like, the Middle East is just on fire for the last 30 years. And so it's like all these people are migrating, and, we can debate that shit too. But Stonehenge is far older than the state of Israel is. And it's like, do the Irish or do the English people that inhabit, the British Isles in England, do they have the same land rights via tribal heritage to their land as the Israelites do? And you're like, because Stonehenge is older. What about if you think about Göbekli Tepe? We were talking about Göbekli Tepe. That's like 12,000 BC. And that's in Turkey. And that is obviously far older than the oldest biblical history that you could ever attribute to the Jewish people. And it's like, well, do they have a right to the land? Do the British people have a right to England because of Stonehenge, because of tribal heritage, ancient heritage? Do the Turks have a right to Göbekli Tepe and that land do they have a right to it because of tribal heritage? And then we can go into the Americas. Now, the Americas is fucking fantastic. We're finding out information almost daily on the amazing amount of history within the Americas, right? And do the Native Americans have a right to the Americas based on land heritage? It's literally the exact same, outside of the biblical interpretation, it's the exact same argument, right? You heard about White Sands National Park?
Yeah, finding the footprints, what was it, 10,000 B, or was it 20? Yeah.
3,000 years old footprints, fossilized footprints, White Sands National Park in Mexico. 23,000 years old.
They found one up in Idaho, and I think it's called Copper Spur or Copper something. It's another dig site, archaeological site, and it's more of an established site as far as it looked like they were butchering animals there, and it wasn't so hunter-gathery. And that I thought it was later, but I think it goes back to 16 to 18,000 years ago. But they're saying at this point it was like an established, not just a hunter-gatherer or what it looks like from their findings. So yeah, the history of the Americas has been turned up on its head the last 20 years as far as
it just keeps getting older, like Graham Hancock says. Also, there's like a mastodon site in freaking San Diego that's like 100,000 years old, where there was like butchered massive. And here's another thing: during the Ice Age, we're gonna go into we can't go into all this stuff, but sea levels were like 500 feet lower than they are now, and so the coastal lines that we have now would have extended out miles and miles and miles during the Ice Age. And there's habitation, like a shit ton of archaeological evidence that's lost to us in the Americas and everywhere else because of the fact that when the ice sheets all melted, like the sea levels went up and it buried a lot of that ancient, what would have been, oceanfront property fucking 20,000 years ago. Right. And so here's the reason why this is important is because, like, in a lot of ways, when the Puritans came over in the 17th century, they taught history through the lens of the Bible. That's how history was understood and believed. It was way before you couldn't translate Egyptian hieroglyphs, like cuneiform, Sanskrit, Sumerian languages. Like a lot of these in that time frame, there was not, that education had not taken place. You know what I mean? They were still very primal and primitive in that respect when it came to understanding what ancient history really meant. To them, ancient history was really like, God, I mean, anything within maybe 1,000 or 2,000 BC, because you could kind of push that to the Bible. Like the oldest stuff in the Bible is about 1,800 BC, like the oldest stuff. 1,800 to 2,000 BC. But what we're finding out now is that's actually like fucking really recent. I mean, just even the Epic of Gilgamesh in Samaria, with the Sumerians in ancient Iraq and Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was Greek for land between the rivers, which was the Tigris and the Euphrates. And like the Epic of Gilgamesh talks about a flood story that literally is almost exactly like Noah's flood story, except it was written way before Noah's flood story was. It talks about how, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think it goes, it's not just Mesopotamia, it's almost every major culture that we have found from that era, whether every pre-Bible times culture that we find, they have that same story of the flood. You know, it's not a, and I think the hardest thing with the Bible or any other the big books that have been doctrines to major religions is a lot of that stuff was also to control a narrative, you know? So like working through the weeds of not saying they weren't historical events, but working through the weeds of through science now and archaeologically, we kind of have a better understanding of what actually happened versus some of the narratives that were persuasive for one side or the other.
Yeah, and there's like even the Old Testament Bible has a hard time, like when it talks about like the Nephilim or the Great Flood, like the timeline with that, there's a lot of mixed feelings about that. You know, like if you talk about Cyrus the Great, you can date Cyrus the Great. You know what I mean? If you talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, like ironically enough, there is art, like those sites have been found archaeologically, and they're really, really, really cool. And we can go into a whole thing on what Sodom and Gomorrah was. It sounds like it was an airburst that blew up over them, and it created a legend. You know, because people are looking at it through their historic lens of time, right? And so, like the Tuskegee, was it the Tuskegee event or no? Russia had an airburst in the early 1900s that would have been the same, like really similar to what happened over Sodom and Gomorrah. And that Sodom and Gomorrah is still around that same time frame. You're still talking like 1800 to 2000 BC. You know what I mean? But you can date that now. When you're talking about the flood or Adam and Eve, if you're talking about like the Nephilim and the giants, and you're talking about a lot of this truly ancient mythology, even the Bible itself, the Bible is dated the whole 6,000 years because of genealogy. It's not because the Bible is saying that this was created in this time and this date. It's through genealogy, because there's a lot of genealogy in the Old Testament, you know, kind of tracing Jesus's bloodline and the bloodlines of like Abram and Abraham and Moses and a lot of these really, really Ezekiel, a lot of these really, really prominent historic Old Testament figures, they trace their bloodline because back in those days, and even in the Middle East today, like names, bloodlines are still righteously way more important to them than it is to us. You know what I'm saying? Like they have 27 names over there because those bloodlines matter so much. We fucking don't see it the same way. And so like the way that history was taught by the Puritans when they came over to the Americas was through the lens of the Old Testament. And so that was as far back as they could really see history at that time. I mean, archaeology the first archaeological dig ever, believe it or not, was done by Thomas Jefferson on his fucking property. And he dug into an ancient earthwork that the Native Americans had done on his property from years and years before. And he found like bodies and sediment layering. So the deeper he went, the older it was. So he found like bodies at the very bottom that were older than the bodies that were stacked on with like other artifacts and stuff. And believe it or not, that was actually the first archaeological dig was Thomas Jefferson doing that and then basically establishing what layer sediment means. Okay. The reason all this is important is because we were talking about land heritage. We're talking about what the history of inhabitation really means, okay, outside of the biblical lens, what you can factually point to. And within the Americas, we have at least verifiable 23,000 years before present, BP, of inhabitation in the Americas, the native peoples. And so if you're going to use the land and habitation argument that peoples are permitted to re-inhabit lands and develop a state because of this, then why don't these same arguments apply to the Native Americans? Why wouldn't the Americas, if the reason why the Jewish people from Europe after the pogroms, terrible pogroms and stuff that were taking place in Russia and Europe in like the late 19th century, where the Jewish people were just getting smoked by primarily Christians, honestly. They were getting blamed for a lot of the same stuff you see with the rise of the Nazis, but this is in the late 19th century. And they started these Jewish peoples, which were really like Eastern European. They had no genetic heritage to Palestine or Israel. And that's another thing that's really important. Like even Benjamin Netanyahu, I call it his family's maiden name was actually Polish. They changed it to Netanyahu when they moved to Ireland, when they moved to Israel, because they needed a name that sounded Hebrew. And because they revived the Hebrew language, and they changed it from something ski to Netanyahu. And genetic tests, this is another thing, because as time goes on, we're marching past all of these old institutions that we used to use for history and archaeology and understanding what that really all truly means. And the people today, genetically, through all kinds of testing, and it's provable, that link up most closely to the ancient Israelites are the freaking Palestinians, because they've never left the area ever. And they were there way before Abram or Abraham came out of like Sumer and then kind of started in a lot of ways the Jewish religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's really relevant because I don't think a lot of people understand the history of, and I think you mentioned this, and you could probably touch on it more, but like when you Google it, it says they occupied Israel for 4,000 years, when really that was partial occupation, and you really add up all the years where Palestinians were there the whole time and actually brought in, were open arms to Jewish people coming there, at certain points, that, not to say that Jewish people weren't there, but to me, it feels pretty entitled to say that this is our land based on, saying that this is your land heritage, where what about the Palestinians' land heritage,
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing too, like what did the Celts become? They became Irish. The Native Americans became American. The Germanic tribes of Europe became German or British or Polish or some or Russian or something else. It's like the ancient tribal peoples of Palestine became Palestinians. They didn't need to be called Palestinians for the last 100,000 years for us to recognize the fact that they've been there forever. I mean, before the Irish were the Irish, they were the Celts. You know what I'm saying? The Germanic tribes of Europe that the Romans were fighting forever weren't always the Germans or the Spanish, or whatever. They were like the Basques. You know what I mean? But they still inhabit the area. It's not like they just didn't exist because there wasn't a name for them that we accept today. Like that name has changed a few different times, And when you talk about Jerusalem is fascinating to me. I've been there. I actually really, really love Jerusalem. The history there is super cool. It's because it's just, the warfare that's taken place, the history that's taken place there is almost second to none. But the thing about it is Jerusalem was founded as a city-state around 3,500 to 3,000 BC. Okay, which is funny because there's a 500-year gap right there. That's like twice as long as the United States has existed. Just in that little gap of we're not really sure of. You know what I mean? It's always funny to think about that. We always have to kind of like, when you look back and you think, oh, give or take 1,000 years, give or take 500 years. Well, it's like, yeah, that's like twice as long as we've even existed as a society. It's hard for us to put our heads around that. But we're talking about what ancient history really means. Ancient history is not 270 years. Ancient history is not 4,000 years. Ancient history is really going back to around the last ice age. Then you're kind of starting to get into what ancient history really means. But Jerusalem as a city-state was not founded as a Jewish, Hebrew, Israeli city-state. It was a pagan city-state that was defendable with walls and just peoples living inside of it for thousands of years before King David conquered it, and he conquered it violently and took it in about 1,000 BC. So it wasn't until 1,000 BC that Jerusalem even became like a theocratic, like theistic kind of state that was built around a specific religion. And at that time, it was Judaism. And so, like, this is basically how, and I have to look at this shit because there's so much history with Jerusalem of like conquering, habitation, fucking exiting, re-entering, exiting again, re-entering again, because you have to, to understand, because listen, we're debating what land heritage means. And if we're going to do that, and we're going to do it the correct way, then we have to come up with numbers. We have to understand what those numbers mean, and we have to compare that to other societies and civilizations and be like, what's just and what's not just based on this. Because if its tribal heritage is the reason why this land belongs to them, then we're going to start asking some questions about some other peoples that have existed for at least 4,000 years that do not have a state. And nobody is fucking going to the UN saying that they deserve a state. Nobody's going to the UN and saying, kick these other people out violently so these people that have been here for longer can have a fucking state. Nobody's saying it for them, and there's quite a few of them. Okay? And so this is basically how it goes. All right? So around 3500 BC, Jerusalem is founded. In 1000 BC, 2,000 fucking years. 2,000 years after Jerusalem was founded. That is a goddamn long time.
Yeah.
It's conquered by King David and turned into a theocratic city-state, basically. The city-state of Jerusalem. Okay? For the first time ever, making it the Jewish kingdom, the center of the Jewish kingdom. Okay? And it actually lasted for about 500 years. Well, really like 420 years. And then in 586 BC, the Babylonians took the city. They destroyed the temple for the first time and then sent the people into exile. Okay, and that's like Exodus, right? And they went and spent like 40 years in the deserts of Iraq, basically, which was then like Sumer or you know, like some like Mesopotamia, like that kind of area. And those are like city states as well. And then in 530 BC, Cyrus the Great, who's mentioned in the Bible like 30 times. That's another one of those like checks you can do, right? The Bible's cool like that. There are a lot of really, really cool historic facts that really fucking are true, especially in the Old Testament. It's kind of neat. And so Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, who actually believed in the live and let live system, gave the Jews back Jerusalem in 530 BC after he conquered them, like after he conquered it basically from the Babylonians. And he said, hey, you guys, he let them rebuild their temple. He let them worship Yahweh, or even maybe El or Elohim. We're not going to really get into that, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So Cyrus the Great, and believe it or not, Genghis Khan was like this too. And it was a great way to expand your empire without having to worry about civil unrest and civil war everywhere. It's like conquer them, let them have their own religion and fucking lands and families, networks. Pay us a tax, and if we go to war, we need warriors. You fucking give us a tax, you give us warriors, you can live and let live. I'll let you have your shit. You fuck with us, you try to rebel, you don't give us tax, you don't give us warriors, and we're going to come crush your dick. That's what we're going to do. And so basically that's how Cyrus the Great operated. That's even how Genghis Khan operated, ironically. And so that's 530 BC. All right? Permitted to re-inhabit. Okay. And then Alexander the Great in 332 BC conquered Jerusalem. And over the next several hundred years, the city was conquered and governed by the following entities: the Romans, the Persians, the Arabs, the Fatimids, the Seljuk Turks, the Crusaders, the Egyptians, the Mamelukes, the Islamists. And so that is a substantial amount of they're not there. That is not continuous inhabitation. Does that sound like fucking continuous inhabitation to you? No, it's not continuous inhabitation, right? And so here's another thing. So let's do some math before we bounce to something else. Let's add all this shit up. And you can do it with me. If you're at home, you can do this shit with me, because we're going to go over this really quick one more time. My calculation, and this is going to get me labeled as the biggest anti-Semite you've ever heard in your life. Like, I could have a Hellfire missile come right through this window right now at any minute. My collective number is 822 years. 822 years. Why? Why do I come up with that? King David, 1000 BC to 586 BC. Cyrus the Great, 530 BC to 332 BC. Roman occupation, 63 BC to 70 AD. United Nations, 1948 to present. And also from 70 AD to 1948, it's over 1,800 years vanquished. 1,800 years and some change where the Israelites, Hebrews, sons and daughters of Israel did not inhabit that land. Okay? And why the genetic marker of today's Jewish people in that region don't match the genetic markers of that land. That's why. Okay? So when you add up all of those things from King David, Cyrus the Great, Roman occupation, United Nations, you get 822 years. Now, when you Google it, it's 4,000 continuous years. That's the Google definition. Now you kind of have to take, you have to on your own, in your own mind, you have to think about this a little bit. You got to do some independent analysis and maybe some research. And you got to be like, okay. And also, what does it mean when the Romans or Cyrus the Great is really occupying it and they're letting you live there? Does that mean that it's your land? Because that 822 years can get, you can keep subtracting that shit. Because when I look at it and I'm like, well, Roman occupation, you guys did a civil war and then they kicked you all the fuck out and they murdered like millions of Jews and then enslaved a bunch of them and then they just disappeared from the region, basically. And here's another thing. Did the fucking Palestinians ever had anything to do with the Israelites, Hebrews, sons and daughters of Israel not inhabiting Jewish land? Did they ever kick them out? Did the Palestinian people, in this record I just read you, the Palestinian people, did I say the fucking Palestinians? Hold on, let me look. King David. Nope, that was a different one. Wait a minute. That's the Google history. Let me go back to where I was at. So you got, yeah, here we go. So Cyrus the Great.
Nope.
What about the Romans? Were they fucking Palestinian?
Nope.
I mean, King David, obviously he wasn't Palestinian, but then Cyrus the Great came and kicked their asses out in 530 BC. The Palestinian people have had nothing to do with the loss of the Israeli state. Nothing. Zero things. Here's another thing. Actually, before I get to that, is there anything you want to say?
No, just touching up that, they had nothing to do. And then when they opened up Israel's state in the 40s, like they were letting people in, they were befriending them, and that's kind of like, I mean, a lot of the Native American tribes did it to people settling, it was like, hey, we're going to let you in. We're going to try to work with you. And then 100 years later, you get fucked by them, kind of, which is, and it's a much elegant and more complicated statement than that, but it's kind of
no, it's super, that's really important because that's another thing. Not only did the Palestinian people have dick to do with kicking the Jewish people out of what they considered to be their homeland. Nothing. They fucking welcomed them after the pogroms of the late 1800s, the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire, before it was blown up after World War I because they chose the wrong side to fight on in World War I, which is a war that should have never fucking happened to begin with. When that region got blown up and then it got divided into all these sects, that's when the British Empire came in and took over Palestine. And that's kind of when the Zionist movement really started to really thrust forward. But before that, literally for like 30 or 40 years almost, not quite that long, the Ottoman Empire was letting European Jewish peoples relocate to Palestine, giving them land, letting them live amongst the people. Like there wasn't big wars, big problems. Like they let them in. They fucking let them in. They had nothing to do with their expulsion to begin with, 1,800 plus years earlier. And then when these poor people were getting pogromed all over Russia and Europe, these Russian families were getting annihilated and destroyed. The Palestinians and the Ottomans were like, hey, like you can come live here. That's cool. Like come in. It literally took like 30 years before, and then after World War I, and then after the Ottoman Empire was dissolved, where they were kind of like, wait a minute, what's going on? What are you guys doing? And then you got the Balfour Agreement, and then they were hedging their bets. Like the British were actually in conversations not only with the Zionists, but they were in conversations with the Ottomans, depending on who was going to win the war. They actually had an agreement in place to keep Palestine if World War I would have turned out differently. And when it turned out differently, they ripped up the Arab agreement and then they instituted the Zionist agreement. And that led to a lot of different wars after that, after it was established in 1948. Because at that time, the Muslims and the Palestinians, they felt like they were lied to, like they were stabbed in the back, because that's not what they agreed to. And they felt like they had played ball for decades. And then when the rubber met the road, like in a way, their kindness, in a way, was used against them. Because by then, the Zionists had all pushed into Israel a lot. The British had taken over that part of the world because of the end of World War II. And then before they knew it, all of a sudden, they were fighting for their lives. And they were fighting for their property and their family and their very existence within a homeland that they had inhabited since time immemorial. Literally, these peoples have been there for tens of thousands of years or longer in that region and not gone anywhere else.
Well, and I think a big part of that was, and rightfully so, the sympathy for the Jewish people after, the early 1900s into World War II. That was, they were kind of drug through it for a long period of time, and there was a very, and not saying it's wrong either. I mean, all those things were atrocious, the Holocaust and all the other stuff, but
Terrible shit. Nobody is here to fucking in any way be like that stuff is acceptable, right? Just like we're not saying, hey, like if you're Hamas and you're showing up and you're cutting people's throats and you're killing kids and you're doing other shit, like I'm against fucking the killing of innocents on every single possible level. I don't give a shit. Like it's inexcusable for me. I think we have come too far as a society, and people we're very strategically streamlined now, and you can see precision, especially in special operations warfare. And it's like you make a decision sometimes on some of this stuff, and there's a lot of stuff we're not going to get into, because we're really just here to talk about tribal land heritage. But it's like, I mean, my God, like the amount of vitriol and lies that are coming out of some of this stuff is just extraordinary.
well, and for me, it more just lies with being a good human, humanitarian stuff, and I understand that those wars and these holy wars there's probably not a real legitimate answer, but anytime I see any country bombing hospitals and things that we wrote laws in, hopefully to learn from the past as nations, saying like, hey, we could have war and we could have our shit, but there's things that we can't do, and they seem to get away, and America as well, get away with a lot of that shit,
Oh yeah, for sure. And that, as is empire, you can look at the history of the Romans, the Mongols, the Macedonians, like the Persians. It goes on and on and on. I mean, empire is going to empire. That's what empire does. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, historically speaking, as far as we know, at least in the last, our documented history, if you can go before like whatever the reset would have been, which was kind of like the flood, the Younger Dryas event, whatever was taking place before that. Like since we've kind of like rebuilt society and come to where we're at right now, it's like that's the expansion of empire. But also the funny thing about the expansion of empire is when it ends up on its ass, it's usually after 1,000 years of fucking up tribal peoples. And then those tribal peoples eventually get their feet underneath them somehow and end up just like sacking Rome, right? It's like you got all these goddamn barbarians come down from Europe, all these big white boys with fucking, like all kinds of crazy haircuts and tattoos and shit. And they came down from Germania and they're like, you know what, Rome, like we're sick of this shit with you people. And then they fucking sacked it and they destroyed it. And it was actually the second time they had done it. And so we're going to talk about like other peoples. It's not just if the Israelites or the Hebrews, that they belong in that land because of just the land heritage, being there for and we'll give you the 4,000 years. I don't agree with the 4,000 year Google history. I've looked into it a little bit more than just believing something I just Googled. And so if we're going to do that, then what about these peoples? So you have the Kurds, the Kurdish people. They're well over 4,000 years old. They live in northern Iraq, southern Turkey, and there's like 30 to 40 million fucking Kurds out there. I work with some of these boys. I mean, these guys are some shit hot fighters too. And they've been fighting for a long, long time, man. Like since time immemorial, way before the United States ever was was a smile on her daddy's pants. You know what I'm saying? Like way before anybody knew anything about us. These guys have been fighting and living in that region. Do they fucking deserve a state? They've helped us out like a lot militarily throughout the years. Do they deserve a state? Because they don't have a state. There's 30 or 40 million of them. They're over 4,000 years old. They have a very specific region they can identify. Okay. They don't deserve a state. The Assyrians, they're over 4,000 years old. Okay. They primarily live in Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey. Very similar to the same region. You know, a lot of same region. They're well over 4,000 years old. They're fully established as a people. They don't get it. They don't have a right to the land. They don't have a right to it, just like the Kurds don't have a right to the land, apparently. The Berber people, over 4,000 years old. They live in Morocco and Algeria. Nobody gives a fuck about them either. The Roma people, they're in India. India is old as shit, by the way, people. Like people should really do some investigations on India. India has got some really cool history. But these people are over 4,000 years old. They reside in India. They don't have a state. They have no fucking rights. They have no state. Do they have a right to the land via their tribal heritage? Okay. Nope. The Tamil people. This is also in India, in Sri Lanka. These guys are some badass fighters from my understanding. I work with some Sri Lankans and they said the Tamils, or the Tamil Tigers, are like, it's kind of like Vietnam era warfare. It's rough. But they've lived there for well over 2,000 years of documented time. Do they have a right to the land? Nope. The Basque people. These are some of the people that sacked Rome. These are some of these badass warriors I was talking about, like the berserkers that got fed up and came down from fucking Europe and came down to Rome and just smashed it. The Basque, well over 2,000 years, Spain and France. They've had a hell of a lot to do with a lot of European liberation from Rome. Do they have a fucking state? Do they deserve to have a state? Do they have a right to a state? Nope. Apparently they don't have a right to a state. So then when like with Mike Huckabee, when he's pressed on this, he's like, well, they're not talked about in the Bible. You know, I mean, the Kurdish people aren't talked about in the Bible. The Irish aren't talked about in the Bible. You know, the Brits, the Stonehenge with their cool little Stonehenge isn't talked about in the Bible. The Burma peoples aren't talked about in the Bible. The Roma, the Tamil, the Basque. And so now you're talking about religion. So if you're going to tell me that land heritage is what this is about, and then I present an argument to you to basically identify how that's bullshit, then you're just going to flip to a biblical narrative and say that because they're in the Bible, which also is not ancient history. I'm sorry. The oldest book in the Bible is 1,800 years old-ish. It's not ancient history. If you're going to point to that. And so it's like, well, that's also not ancient history either. And so what you're really just telling me is that it's like you're kind of using the Christian Zionist argument at that point. Yeah. And you're just saying that that you believe biblically that they deserve what they have, and for us to be willing to sacrifice whatever we need to sacrifice as a people to make sure that their society flourishes. Because all these other arguments are bullshit. They're just bullshit as far as I'm concerned at this point. I've investigated them a lot. I've investigated these timelines a lot in these heritages. And I'm just like, my conclusion is if we're going to do that, then there's a hell of a lot of other peoples out there in the world that deserve it more than the Jewish people do.
Well, and I think the big part of that too is with like as far as comparing it to the argument American who say is pro-Christian Zionist of what's happening, and like that does bring like, and I think the argument is Americans, especially over the last, really since 9/11, we're taught to have this view on Muslims, you know? So it's the same thing as how we treat, not everybody, but how people talk about Native Americans or savages. They're strapping bombs at people. We automatically devalue those people. So when the righteous people come over who are doing it right, and there's truth to all of that, but these are with the Indians, like we've talked about before. American settlers saw them after they have fought the Spanish settlers, and like we came up to them when they were on edge already. They've seen some of their cultures and other tribes get eliminated. They've seen their other tribes decide to work with the enemy, so that means now that they're the enemy, and um, it's when you start looking at it from a broad perspective and trying to Americanize it, it's a real interesting thing to look at it that way, because it brings different perspectives of the person who's anti-immigrant. So you're saying the Palestinians don't have a right to have their culture removed, just because it says Palestinian culture, like
Yeah, right.
where does the hypocrisy end and begin in that conversation?
Exactly. Well, we can bring it right to today, right? Like President Trump is president largely because of the illegal immigration problem in the United States. I mean, like people were really, really pissed about how, like the flooding of the border by the tens of thousands of people coming across it. Like however you feel one way or the other about it, it doesn't really matter. Like he was really elected in a lot of ways because of that. And now ICE in a lot is turned loose in a lot of cities and people are upset about it. And we talked a little bit about that in our first episode. But it's like if you Americanize it, it's like why were Americans so fucking pissed off enough to put Trump back in office and then release ICE onto the streets? It's because a lot of people were seeing their culture and their language and their society change. And it was like a scary transitional period, right? To be like, wait a minute, we have our traditional values, we have our institutions and our belief structure, and we've kind of held on to this, through the last couple of generations. And if we're just going to let these peoples that really aren't our peoples try to take the racial aspect out of it, just a different group of people with a different language and a different ideologies about religion, and culture, and political theories and stuff like that. And then we're like, wait a minute, fuck this. Like, we're not okay with this. Like, we're not changing our culture for these people that are coming over here. Get them back over there. Well, the Palestinians were dealing with that shit for 30 years. On an elevated level, and they were welcoming it. They were way more open to Jewish immigration into Palestine than we are for Hispanic immigration into America, ironically. Like there's something to be said for that. People, like, the fact that that's lost to history is terrible to me because I feel like these people should be treated a lot better than they are. And like, I'm sorry, man, but it's like the same thing with the IRA. The British, when they went to Tanzania, you know what they did to the Tanzanians? They exterminated them. There isn't a goddamn Tanzanian left on planet motherfucking Earth because the British annihilated every single one of them. And it's like, if you're going to use those tactics, you are going to create a massive amount of hate, a massive amount of blowback. That's how the IRA starts. That's how goddamn Hamas, unfortunately, starts. Hey, how did the revolution start? We were fucking revolutionaries in this country because we were like, you're not going to put your thumb on us. We're going to be independent. We're going to come up with our own outcomes. Go fuck yourself. And it's like, listen, we are those people. And so it's like to think that there's not going to be a specific outcome that is going to stem from this kind of violence and aggression. You're out of your goddamn mind. Like, what do you think is going to happen? And it's going to get worse now because of this shit for the last 4 years. Dude, it's brutal over there. I mean, the reason why they've killed over, like, God knows how many journalists have been killed in like Gaza since the start of the war, which is a direct
237 or something.
Big time. A lot. And it's like, well, they don't allow outside journalists in. And so everybody's like, oh, well, they're Palestinian journalists, so they're terrorists because they're Palestinian. It's like, because again, every Palestinian is fucking Hamas, right? It doesn't matter if it says press. Apparently, they're not allowed to have their own press people. Just like if you live in Chicago, they're all fucking gangster disciples. Everybody in Chicago is a gangster disciple, right? Everybody in Palestine is Hamas. And so it's like, yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of this comes down to optics, and it's kind of funny of how many, I mean, there's definitely cultural differences and ideologies differences when it comes to religion. But for instance, in America, like a lot of these people who are immigrating here, and especially when it was more Mexicans and others, they're Catholic people. They don't believe in gay marriage. They believe in having family structure, community. Like they believe in a lot of the same things. They may do a Day of the Dead celebration that we don't understand, but as far as ideology goes, outside of the skin color, and this is a very broad subject because we could break it down. There is big differences, but some of the key things that we like to argue about in this country, like they agree with us, you know?
No, it's true. I mean, yeah, it is ironic. A lot of Hispanic people, Mexicans, and specifically the Catholics, are very conservative people, very, very anti-abortion, pro big family, um, kind of very live and let live mentality. Uh, they want the best for their families and stuff. In a lot of ways, those immigrant populations, like the conservatives, on the right, ironically, would identify with them a hell of a lot more than somebody lives with blue hair living in Seattle. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Then
Like
that's
a hell of a
I
lot more.
always love to laugh at that because it's pretty ironic to me. And a lot of this is from me working trades and being on job sites with these guys. And I don't think a lot of people understand too, like Mexicans, like actual from Mexico, like they have a lot of weird racial hostility towards like other South American countries, and I think a lot of Americans just see it as like brown people. We don't know if someone's from Ecuador, Peru, Mexico. We see it, and there's a reason why in these big immigration flows from these other countries, they didn't stay in Mexico because they were just as, you know, how we see them from another country. So this immigration problem just worked its way up from South America through Central America into America. And I don't know there's a happy medium. I think that's the
Well, that's
hardest thing when it comes to
well, that's
colonialism
another
and immigration and
Americanization thing
stuff.
too. Like if you think about because in the United States we're very blessed as a people, and why are we blessed? Because we're not experiencing warfare all the time from nation states that are right next door to us. We're not worried about a civil war bleeding over in the United States, not necessarily. Maybe a little bit from Mexico, but that hasn't been a problem. Um, like we're a huge country. We have Canada above us. We have Mexico below us. We have the Pacific to our fucking left, the Atlantic to our right, and it's like
And the
strategically
Mississippi running down the middle, which
That's
is the
right. I mean,
longest, which made
mhm.
us a bunch of money in the starting of this country because it's the longest river where there's no dams or anything like that. So for
Yeah,
trade and stuff, that's another big deal.
yeah, we don't have to worry about fucking civil war like a lot of these, South Americans and stuff coming up. You know, that's their reality. That's their lived reality in a lot of ways, and like why a lot of them come here, like right or wrong. But as Americans living here in our privileged little lives that we really do have, which are extraordinarily privileged, even though we're starting to fall on some pretty serious hard times, things are not starting to look that way anymore. But when it comes to invaders, when it comes to civil war bleeding into the United States, it's not a concern. It's not a concern for us. And so it's like for your average Joe, Joe Fuzzy Nuts on the street, working his 9 to 5 job, raising his kids, paying his mortgage, paying his bills and shit. He's not fucking worry about civil war bleeding over into his little town that he lives in. Now, if you live, in Bosnia, right? Like, yeah, you got some fucking problems of some civil war possibly bleeding over into your society. You know what I mean? And that's going to create some kind of event. But it's like for us here in the United States, strategically, just based on location and current partnerships and geography, it's not a concern for us. We can't identify with those people. That's like it's very hard for us to identify with the Palestinians. Their history is not our history. We can identify with the Native Americans, and most Americans now will say, they got a raw deal. It's pretty shitty what we did. We broke every fucking agreement we ever made with them, ever, ever. And it's like stabbed in the back over and over and over again. We had those goddamn think about those child re-education schools, like those church run, Catholic run
Yeah.
schools. Like in Canada, Canada has verified 30,000 Native American children deaths in those schools. 30,000 Native American children deaths, murders in those schools. The United States isn't officially willing to do that yet. But guess what? The archaeological stuff that's taking place outside of those schools right now that used to be around in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, they're fucking finding a shit ton of bodies. And it looks like the 30,000 number in Canada is pretty close to that here in the United States. So you're talking about around 60,000 Native American children that were forcibly removed from their families, put into re-education camps, and fucking murdered. You know, and it's like we can identify with that now a little bit because that's like our history. You know what I mean? And most people
Right.
today are like, that sucks. That's terrible. Yeah, I would have probably fought against the US military, I think. You know what I mean? In that respect. Yeah, probably would have taken up arms. But it's like the Palestinians, we cannot identify with them. We fucking can't. They're too far removed away from us. We send our soldiers to fight wars half the world away, and they experience trauma, and our society does not experience that same trauma. Okay.
Right.
And so these wars that we're fighting that are so far away, when these soldiers come home and they see these things and they start to identify with these peoples a little bit more, like you saw in Vietnam. The Vietnam era was one of the most anti-war generations ever. And you're seeing it now with the GWAT generation. Like there's a lot of guys, they're like, I'm fucking like, this is all bullshit. Like the Iraq war was complete bullshit. And it's like the Gulf of America is like the Gulf of I'm not dying for fucking Israel. I mean, that's in a lot of ways, that's how people are starting to feel, man, because it seems like on the outside and the more investigating you do, unfortunately, like I'm not willing to sacrifice my sons or my family to the altar of another state. Like religion, be damned, man. Like we were very spiritual people in this house. And like, if my kids are getting sacrificed for anything, it's for liberty where they fucking live.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not for some distant land that we have nothing to do with.
Well, and I think a big shift here, just why this conversation's happening, is because I think for a long time, America thought and felt like they were the good guy. You know, we were the big hammer. We kept things in line, and then it turns out that our politicians are fucking 13-year-olds, and it's just as corrupt as any other country. The money, I mean, just the Epstein files and the connections to Israel, and I think that's a whole nother topic. If we decide to have an Epstein episode, we could get into. But yeah, there's a big awakening of, I think, how people view America, and there's some people who, I mean, I love America. I think it's a very fortunate place to be in. I think we've been codified and let it get so bad because we have TVs and technology and all the shit at our fingertips, and we're one of the biggest consumers, you know, outside of China.
We've become complacent as a people. We're very, 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 very complacent, and we have let it fall into ruin.
Yeah, and
With purpose, we've let it happen.
yeah, well, and this is where it's like on everybody. You know, the last 20 years, I don't care which president was there, the wealth gap grew. You know, billionaires made money. You know, like that's the yeah, I just think America in general and much of Europe and other things are realizing that. And I think, and I'm also worried about other countries taking advantage of where we're at right now, you know, because it's a really interesting time in America as far as economically, how we view our politicians. Yeah, it's an interesting time.
It's interesting and it's scary, man. And that's why we're doing this shit, homie, because
I agree.
this is not a call to arms. This is a fucking, let's not fucking have a call to arms, because I feel like that's almost like the next thing that's going to happen. And it's like, I've seen that. I've been in warfare enough to know what that looks like. And there's no glory in it with this shit.
Well, and it really bothers me when people call for that too. Like I want an uprising. I want to see the oligarchy crumble. You know, like there's certain things like I would love to see, but as far as like civil war and stuff goes, like I don't want to worry about getting food on my plate. I don't want to worry about hearing one of my friends got caught up in some shit because, you know, like civil war doesn't look good. And there's a group of people here that romanticize about it. And that's the thing where it's like, you think you want that life because you got some guns and you think you're ready for it. But wait until every person in this big city comes to your small town, you know, like that. And that's the thing where, some of the rhetoric I think could calm down and having like a conversation, not a fucking argument, you know, and not pointing fingers and calling people names. And not to say you can't get heated and have convictions behind what you're saying, but we're
Yeah,
all neighbors here.
absolutely.
We need to start acting like
And I
it.
want to and I want to reinvest in the American people. Like that's what this is about. Like as much as like shitting on Israel, like people are going to think that we're just shitting on Israel, whatever. If that's going to be your opinion, fine. But like what we're really talking about here is the reinvestment in the American project. Reinvestment in the American project. We have a good foundation. Our Bill of Rights is stellar. It's unbelievable. Like those guys that put that shit together, like that is the reason why we're not being arrested in fucking Europe for Facebook posts right now, is because of the goddamn Bill of Rights. And if that shit wasn't there, we'd be in real trouble right now. Like we do have a foundation. We have a foundation that is worth securing and keeping. And that's what's so maddening about people that are willing to take the easy route and shit on specific amendments to get their way. Because we have power now. And since we have power, we just need to get shit done. Well, guess fucking what? The next side, the other side's going to think the same thing. Oh, we have power now. We just need to get shit done. And as soon as that happens on both ends, you can take the Bill of Rights and you can wipe your ass with it. It's over. It's fucking over. And it's like, I love that foundation. Now, you know, like we can go into the fact that the founders had slaves, and obviously the Native Americans and all that stuff. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect at all. Okay. But it was also for the time an extraordinary document. It's an extraordinary
Well,
document. And the reason we are a free people today, the reason we were able to have this goddamn podcast, the reason why you have the shit hanging on your wall you do, is because we're fucking, in a lot of ways, that structure, that foundational document has somehow been able to fucking withstand 100 years of getting picked at. From the Patriot Act, different things with the First Amendment, different things with the Second Amendment. Now you got the Fourth Amendment, like through the fucking Seventh Amendment, that are starting to get shit on with incarceration and states' rights and like being able to incarcerate you almost for fucking nothing anymore, which was, you know, 5 of the first 10 amendments was really trying to stop that from happening because it was such a big problem during the time of the founders. They lived it. They experienced that shit. Guess what? If we wouldn't have won the revolution, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, fucking George Washington, Thomas Paine, Sam Adams, they would have been hung from this town square. They'd have been hung. That's what happened to the Irish in what was it, like 1916. They did when they had the Irish Easter Revolt, and they modeled their Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, after ours, and they fucking lost. And all
we'd
of
be
their
having cheers that says "Long live the king" or "Long
yeah,
live the
most of their
queen." You
founding
know,
fathers, which would have been their founding fathers in like 1916, they're all hung. The British killed them all. They would have done that to us too. And so it's like, you know what? Like this document, this extraordinary document that people may or may not like to shit on, but our politicians that swear on it absolutely could give a fuck about, is absolutely worth us saving. And that's what this whole thing is about right now. Reinvesting in the American project, the American project. I'm sick of all this international warfare. I'm sick of sending all of our money to everybody else that isn't our fucking kids. I'm sick of this shit. We are losing
well,
our society. We're losing our people. And it's like, we can't have it anymore. We have to reinvest in the American project or just say fucking sayonara. If we're willing to say sayonara and move on to something else, then let's just goddamn get to it.
well, and I think a big part of it is, and we're also told this. I mean, I just want to say lie that the money's not there to do things like universal health care and all these things that, you know, I don't believe in a lot of social programs, but I don't believe in for-profit medicine. You get results like COVID, you get a bunch of shit that's not good for people when you have stuff for profit. And with like you said, medical debt, other things that we've touched on, like that's one thing that would move the needle in this country if people weren't having to spend $600 to make sure they could take their kids to a doctor's appointment, you know, like things like that. And we're told that the money's not there, we can't do it. But then the military industrial complex, which almost every war in the last 20 years has been directly involved with Israel, you know, like we spend so much money on war weapons. And if we spent half of that money on creating programs for veterans or healthcare or social security, whatever you want it to be. We would have fucking options, but we want to pretend like we don't.
It's like we said, it's like, what would $20 billion do for South Chicago? Even though all of Chicago are gangster disciples. They're all gangster disciples. They should all just be carpet bombed to death. But it's like, what would $20 billion do for South Chicago? Fucking South Central Los Angeles, the trailer hoods of West Virginia, the motherfuckers, coal miners, and you know, in West Virginia, the trailer hoods of Kentucky, like all these people dying from crushing medical debt that you were talking about. People having to start GoFundMe's to raise $2 million to get one transplant, and they've had medical insurance their whole life, and they get denied fucking coverage. And these guys are like, "Sorry, you're just going to die. We're just going to let you die. Sorry." And that's their email to you, basically. "Sorry, you're not going to cover this shit. I've had medical insurance for 10 years. I bought into. You're not going to fucking cover it." And it's like, people are fed up with this stuff. Like I said, reinvest in the American project, homie. That's what we need to do. We got anything else we want to say, or we want to sign off?
No, I think it's a good spot to end. Feel like it went a little smoother than the last one, so we're getting better at it, which is good to know.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Love you, man.
Touché.
Appreciate the conversation, dude.
Yeah, love too, man.